So this is yet another one of my RC10 projects. I have finally found a use for this nice orange chassis. I've had this for a little while, and I've tried to figure out, should I put this in a four-wheel drive conversion or do something different? So I decided to use it for this build, because for this build I'm doing basically a repeat of what I did about a year and a half ago with the long front arm conversion with the RC10T front end. So the long front end, but in this case I have RPM World's front and rear arms. So to do the rear arms, you actually have to do some routing of the rear of the chassis to make the inside a little bit narrower, because the arms themselves are longer. So in order to get the correct track width, you have to move this suspension arm mounts inwards, and then the longer arm pushes everything back outwards, so that with the original dished wheels, everything is appropriate. So considering how I did something similar to this a while back, and that is a shelfer, I really wanted to make a runner of that same kind of concept, because I know one or two people that have runners with the long front end conversion, and they look pretty nice. And I figured this might be more durable than the Nix 91 that I put together, which is effectively the same concept. So I'd like to maybe compare this to the Nix 91 in terms of how it runs, in terms of its durability, blah, blah, blah. But in any case, this is just my next runner. One other thing that I think is unique about this, outside of the RPM parts, which are pretty rare, is the fact that I want to try to play around with Viscodrive units. So this unit you see here is a Schumacher Viscodrive. It's basically Team Schumacher's version of the Losi Hydra drive, which is this guy right here. Okay, so for my MIP 410 Legend project, I have a Hydra drive that I put on there, and I sort of briefly described how the Hydra drive works. It's basically a viscous coupling unit, and you have an impeller blade that is more or less connected to the spur gear. And so as you apply power to the spur gear, it spins the impeller blade, but the impeller blade is in a housing full of fluid. And so the blade has to push the fluid around and force the fluid to couple to the housing to move the actual lay shaft or input shaft to the transmission. And that's how you couple power through the viscous coupling through the drivetrain. And so that's on one side of the spur gear, and on the other side you have a conventional slipper clutch. So it's kind of these two things combined that allow you to adjust how much torque how much maximum torque you can couple through the drivetrain, as well as the sensitivity with which that torque gets coupled through the drivetrain based on the difference in speed between the wheels and the track, or between the motor and the wheels. Okay, so there's the Losi version of this, and there's the Schumacher version of this, which is a very different assembly and is really interesting. And I still don't quite fully understand how this works. I have to stare at it a little more and play around with it a little more. But basically, there's no impeller blade in here like there is in the Hydra drive unit. It's all just plates, and the slipper clutch is actually integrated into this this viscous coupling unit, and the slipper pad itself is in the same cavity that you're filling with viscous oil. So that's kind of peculiar, and I just need to, again, I need to look at this a little more to figure out exactly how the viscous portion of this works compared to the Losi case, where you have quite literally a fan blade in a bowl of liquid of some sort. That's not really the case here, but this is still some kind of viscous drive system, which is kind of cool. And it assembles differently than the Hydra drive. It has certain advantages and disadvantages. This is actually adjustable more easily. All I really have to do is take this part of the assembly and screw it in more tightly or more loosely to adjust the viscous coupling part of this unit. With the Hydra drive, you have to actually change the oil. So I'd have to take the whole thing apart, clean it out, and put a different oil in there to change how much viscous coupling I have. Okay, so the way in which they're adjusted is different. So I figured, okay, well, maybe I can play around a little bit this outdoor season and try the Viscodrive unit for a little while, and then try the Hydra unit for a little while, and just see how they work. Maybe I'll run one of these at Vonats this year, because the track surface that we ran at Vonats last year and we'll be running at this year, for the first week or two, it's actually a pretty loose surface. So to use a conventional slipper clutch doesn't really offer you that much. I'm beginning to think that a Hydra drive unit or some kind of viscous drive unit might be advantageous in that case, where you have really low grip and sometimes it feels like you're driving on ice, at least, when the track isn't really broken in yet. So it would be really interesting to see just how this plays out. So I want to play around with it a little bit, because people have these really nice, Hydra drives and Viscodrive units, and they just put them on their shelf cleans and they never run them. I'd like to try to run them to really see what they're like and give you some sort of commentary on it. So in any case, that's sort of what I have planned for this kit. There's nothing too special about this build other than the viscous drive units and the RPM Worlds front and rear arms. The long front end, I'll be putting big bore shocks on this, and that's it. Otherwise, it's basically a conventional RC10. So in time, it'll be a while, but in time I'll have some kind of, hopefully, follow-up video where I compare the two and how they actually run on a running car in the same chassis, and I can give you some idea of what those are like. In the meantime, this is it for this project, and thanks for watching.